listening heart, lean in a little closer. Not because you've been doing something wrong and need correction. Not because this is a moment of urgency or alarm. Lean in because there is something I have been waiting for the right quiet to say to you. Something that belongs to the particular interior space you are in right now. Something meant for the person you are when the noise finally settles long enough for a different kind of hearing to become possible. Lean in because what I am about to say does not shout. It never has. It moves the way a current moves beneath the surface of a river, invisible from the bank, unmistakable when you are in the water. It has been present in every chamber you have ever sat in. It has been threading through every moment you thought you were alone. It has not been loud, but it has been continuous. And it has been speaking directly to the place in you that the loud things have been trying to reach, but cannot. There is a kind of clamor that is specific to this season of the world. You know it well, because you have been living inside it. It is not simply the volume of external sound, though the volume is real enough. It is a kind of internal pressure that the outer din produces. A low, persistent hum of stimulation that keeps the mind moving even when the body has stopped. That keeps the attention jumping across surfaces even when you have deliberately sought a moment to be quiet. The world has built itself in recent years into an architecture that makes genuine quiet genuinely difficult. Every surface offers another entry point for demand. Every moment of stillness carries the awareness that something, somewhere, is requiring your attention and waiting. The hours of an ordinary day have become filled not only with the tasks the day actually contains, but with the ongoing management of everything that wants to be addressed. The messages, the concerns, the information arriving in a stream that does not reduce simply because you stop engaging with it. And underneath all of that, quieter but more insistent, the inward commotion of a mind that has been trained to be responsive, to be available, to be ready, to be alert, until alertness and anxiety have become so intertwined that it is difficult to tell them apart. The quietest voice carries the loudest truth. I want you to hear that, not as a pleasant observation about the nature of things, but as a direct description of what has been happening in your own life. The whisper that has been speaking the most essential things to you, the speaking that has been trying to reach past all the competing stimulation to tell you something about who you are, about where you stand, about what is actually real in the midst of everything that only seems real. That word has never been the loudest one in the chamber. It has been the stillest one. The one that waits, with a patience that belongs to something outside of time, for a moment when the other sounds have tired themselves out. The one that does not compete. The one that does not amplify itself to win a place in your awareness, but simply remains present, day after day, season after season, a steady thread of something true woven into the fabric of every moment of your existence. That presence is not behind you, or above you, or somewhere you have to travel to find. It is speaking from within the deepest part of who you are. And this moment, this specific, unhurried, inward moment, is the kind of moment in which it can finally be heard. What does it mean that I have been speaking to you all along? I do not mean something theoretical. I mean it in the most concrete, practical, immediate way possible. The sense of direction you felt in a situation where the logical choice was not obvious. That was not an accident of intuition. The sudden settling that moved through your chest in a moment of high anxiety. The quieting that arrived without explanation and did not correspond to any change in the circumstances. That was not random chemistry. The persistent returning of a thought that carried something essential. A thought you kept setting aside because the day was too full to sit with it. A thought that kept coming back because what it contained was true and something in you knew it. That persistent returning had a source. Every one of those movements in your inner life was a form of the whisper I am describing. The prophet who had run into the wilderness did not hear me in the great wind or in the earthquake or in the fire that came after. He heard me in a still, small voice. That is still how I come. The gentle, faithful thread of the divine, present in the most ordinary moments of your life, patient in its speaking, faithful in its continuity. You have been hearing me longer than you realize. What is different right now is simply that you have come close enough to listen with intention. So let me speak. Let me use this quiet to say what has been waiting to be said. Not a message of alarm, not a list of corrections. A word that begins in the recognition of what you have actually been navigating. Because I see the quality of what you have been living with. The mental effort it requires to function well in a world that does not slow down simply because a person needs it to. The particular exhaustion of carrying inward burdens while the outer demands remain constant, as though the world has no awareness of the weight a person might be moving through on a given day. The way a crowded morning can press in from all sides before you have had a single moment to locate yourself, to find the quiet center that used to be more accessible and has become, in this season, more difficult to reach. I know the specific texture of what your days have held. I have been present in all of it. And I want you to know, before anything else, that the difficulty of finding stillness in a world that does not offer it freely is not a spiritual failure. It is a human reality that I see with clear eyes and meet with a specific kind of grace. A grace that does not demand you be perfectly composed before it draws close. You have been trying to hear in a space where too many things are speaking at once. That is not a personal shortcoming. It is the condition of anyone living in the midst of what this particular era has produced. An environment of relentless input, where every moment of quiet is treated by the surrounding culture as an opportunity to fill, where silence has been taken over by the assumption that it must be productive, must be purposeful, must justify itself by generating something of use. And so, the silence that the soul most deeply requires has become difficult to access. Not because it is not available. It is always available. It is built into the very structure of who you are. But because the habits of attention that your days have been training into you run in a different direction. The pull is toward the outer surface. The soul's genuine home is the inner depth. And there is a daily friction between those two directions that wears on a person in ways that are real, even when they are subtle. This friction is not something I am asking you to resolve by trying harder. The invitation is not a demand for greater spiritual discipline or a more rigorous ordering of your inner life. The invitation is simpler, and it goes to a different place entirely. It goes to the place beneath the effort, beneath what you do or do not do with your time, beneath whether you have managed to create the right conditions for stillness. Beneath all of that, deep inside who you are, something is already at rest, already quiet, already listening. I am not asking you to manufacture stillness. I am asking you to notice the quiet that is already there, at the center of who I made you to be, untouched by the clamor that moves above it. The din moves on the surface. What I am speaking of lives deeper than the surface, and reaching it does not require extraordinary effort. It requires a kind of surrender, the simple willingness to stop trying to get somewhere and acknowledge that you are already somewhere. You are already in the presence that you have been looking for. The quietest voice carries the loudest truth, and the truth it is carrying for you in this moment is this: you have not been abandoned in the din. You have been accompanied through every inch of it. The things that have been wearing on you have not gone unnoticed. The inner strain of living in a time that asks so much of the attention, the specific weariness of a mind that rarely gets to completely stop, the spiritual hunger of a person who knows there is something deeper available but keeps finding the pathway to it blocked by everything else that has crowded in. I have been present to all of it, not as an observer at a distance, present in the way that only the one who made you can be present, inward, intimate, aware of every movement of the deepest part of you. And what I want you to receive before we go anywhere else together is the simple and the foundational. You are not lost in the commotion. You are known within it. Consider for a moment the specific way that the clamor of this season has been affecting the quality of your attention. Not just the external sound, the pinging of devices, the constant low hum of notifications, the ambient awareness of everything that might be demanding a response, but the secondary uproar that this external stimulation creates inside you. A kind of internal restlessness that persists even after the devices are silenced. A residual agitation that the mind carries from the demands of an overstimulated day into the moments that are supposed to be quiet. You have sat in what should be a calm moment and found that the stillness does not arrive simply because the external volume has been turned down. Something in you keeps moving, keeps processing, keeps running the calculations of the day even after the day has technically ended. This secondary din is what makes genuine inwardness difficult for people in this season. It is not laziness or lack of spiritual desire that keeps so many people from the quiet center. It is the accumulated momentum of a life that has been moving fast, that has been trained into a posture of constant readiness, and that does not slow simply because someone has chosen to sit down. What I want you to understand about this is that my word reaches beyond the secondary commotion as well. The gentleness of the divine whisper is not fragile in the face of internal agitation. It does not require the inner life to be perfectly quiet before it can be heard. It moves through the agitation the way a current moves through turbulence, present in it, not overcome by it, finding its way to the places that need it most, regardless of the resistance it encounters along the way. If you have been waiting until you feel properly calm to attempt to hear this whisper, you have been waiting for a condition that the speaking itself does not require. Come agitated, come distracted, come with the residue of a difficult day still moving through you. Come exactly as you are, in exactly the inward state you are actually in. The presence will meet you there. It has never needed you to be somewhere other than where you are in order to speak directly into where you are. Now let me describe something that I want you to understand about the whisper I am speaking of, not in abstract terms, in the specific language of what it actually sounds like when you encounter it from the inside. It does not arrive in the tones of accusation. When the speaking that comes from the deepest part within you rises into your awareness, it does not arrive telling you what you should have done differently, cataloging the ways you have fallen short, delivering a verdict on your performance. The tone of accusation and the sound of your own inner critic are familiar, and you have likely been living with them for years. They are loud. They are opinionated. They arrive with evidence and arguments and a kind of urgent insistence that they be heard. What I am describing is different in every quality. It is gentle. It is not gentle in the sense of weak or indifferent. It carries an authority that nothing loud can match. But it arrives without judgment, without the weight of disappointment, without the particular sting of being assessed and found lacking. It arrives as something closer to recognition, as though a part of you that had been unnamed has suddenly been called by its actual name, as though something that had been invisible to everyone, including at times to yourself, has been accurately seen. The way the divine whisper distinguishes itself from the other voices in your inward life is not primarily about volume. Anxiety speaks softly sometimes. Worry can make itself very quiet. The distinction lies in what the speaking produces in you after it has been heard. The utterance of fear, however quiet it may be at times, leaves a particular residue, a tightening, a closing, a narrowing of what feels possible, a slight darkening of the air in the space around you. The tone of the ego, even in its most helpful sounding forms, leaves the residue of its own agenda, a slight performance in the direction it recommends, a transaction-flavored quality to the guidance it offers. The sacred inner wisdom I am describing leaves something entirely different in its wake, a kind of opening, a spaciousness that was not there before the word was spoken, a sense of something becoming clear that had been obscured, not because new information was delivered, but because a layer of din was briefly removed, and what had been true all along became briefly, beautifully visible. That clarity does not always arrive in words. Sometimes it arrives as a feeling in the chest that something is right, that a particular direction carries integrity, that a particular fear is not the truth it was claiming to be. It arrives as the settling of something that had been agitated, as the quiet return of a sense of proportion that the noise had been distorting. There is a distinction worth sitting with carefully, because it matters for how you learn to recognize this whisper in the everyday texture of your life. Between the speaking of the ego, which comes from a place of protection, from the accumulated history of what has hurt you, from the patterns laid down by every experience of not being safe, and the word of the deeper wisdom I am describing, which comes from a place of wholeness, from a ground that the injuries of your history have not reached, from a settled knowing that exists prior to everything your life has taught you to fear. Both are present in you. Both have their say in the inward conversation. The ego voice is older in terms of practice. It has been speaking longer. It has more material to work with. It has the confidence that comes from having been listened to for years. The deeper presence is older in every other sense. It predates the fears the ego has assembled. It speaks from a layer of you that formed before any wound had a chance to form. It carries the knowledge of who you actually are, rather than who the world's responses to you have taught you to believe you are. Learning to tell them apart is not a single moment of clarity. It is a practice. repeated returning to the quality of what each one leaves behind. What closes you is not the voice of the sacred. What opens you, gently, without urgency, without transaction, that is the still whisper I have been speaking since before you first became aware that there was any speaking happening at all. Your body knows the difference, even when your mind is not yet sure. There is a specific physical signature that genuine inner clarity produces, a release somewhere in the chest or the shoulders, a deepening of the breath, a sense of the field of vision slightly expanding, as though a window within you has been opened, and the light that comes through it is different from the light that had been available before. This signature is not manufactured. It is not something you can counterfeit by willing yourself to feel peaceful. It arrives or it does not, and when it arrives, you recognize it even if you have never had language for it. That recognition is itself a form of hearing the whisper. Not the speaking in words, but the presence in the language of the body, which is one of the oldest languages available to a person seeking to orient themselves toward what is true. Let me go directly now to the specific weight you have been carrying, because the invitation into stillness is not an invitation to pretend that weight does not exist. It is not a spiritual bypassing of the genuine exhaustion that has accumulated within you. The exhaustion is real. The weariness of a spirit that has been navigating difficulty without adequate rest is real. The fractures in the confidence that come from carrying concerns without being able to put them down, those are real, and they deserve to be named before anything else is said about what is possible on the other side of them. There is a particular kind of tired that does not respond to sleep. You may have discovered this. The body rests, and the mind, to some degree, quiets, but there is a layer beneath the mind that does not quiet in the same way. A layer where the unresolved things have taken up residence, where the concerns that feel too large for any single day have built themselves a kind of permanent shelter, where the questions that have no clean answers have made themselves at home in the deepest part of your days. This kind of tired is not a physical condition. It is a spiritual one. It is the weariness that comes from a spirit that was built for connection with something beyond the ordinary, and that has been functioning for a long time, primarily on the resources of the ordinary. The spirit was made to receive from a source that does not deplete. When it is forced to draw only from its own reserves, the reserves run thin. Not because the spirit is weak, because it was never designed to sustain itself without the replenishment that comes from genuine contact with the divine. Let me describe what this depletion actually looks like from the inside, because I want you to be able to recognize it clearly. When the spiritual reserves are low, a distinctive flatness settles over things that used to carry meaning. The practices that once felt nourishing begin to feel like obligations. The connections that used to generate genuine warmth begin to feel like tasks on a list. Beauty, which used to arrive unexpectedly and stop you in the middle of an ordinary moment, begins to reach you less often or with less force. This is not a sign that the beauty has disappeared or that your capacity for it has permanently diminished. It is a sign that the channel through which beauty used to travel, the channel of genuine inner receptivity, has become clogged with the residue of sustained depletion. A person living with low spiritual reserves is not experiencing the world less vividly because the world has become less vivid. They are receiving it through a filter of exhaustion that mutes the signal. And the muting can persist for so long that a person forgets what it felt like to receive without the filter. This is exactly where I am meeting you. Not after the filter has been removed by your own effort. Not once you have managed to wrest your way back to a state of greater receptivity. here, with the filter in place, with the muting active, with whatever combination of weariness and longing and low-grade disorientation belongs to this specific season of your inner life. Because the grace I offer does not wait for better conditions. It enters through the filter. It reaches the places that the filter was supposedly blocking. It moves through the depletion rather than around it, the way warmth moves through a cold space, not requiring that space to already be warm before it enters, but changing it by its presence. That is what is available to you in this moment. Not a return to some previous state of greater aliveness that you have been unable to find your way back to. Something new being offered into the specific conditions of where you actually are. The grace I am offering in this moment is precisely the replenishment you have not been allowing yourself to receive. And the word allowing is deliberate. It is not that the grace has been withheld. Grace is not something rationed or withheld based on performance. It has been available continuously, the way light is available on a cloudy day, present beyond the clouds, even when the clouds are what you can see. What has stood between you and the experience of it is not a question of my willingness to give it. It is a question of the posture with which you have been approaching it, attempting to earn it, which produces the exhaustion of constant striving, attempting to manage it, which produces the exhaustion of never being able to relax because the management is always ongoing, approaching it with the buried suspicion that it might be withdrawn if you are not careful, which produces the exhaustion of a person who cannot fully receive a gift because they are always braced for the moment it is taken away. What would it mean to let grace be what it actually is, not a conditional offering, not a reward for good spiritual behavior, not something you have to be sufficiently quiet or sufficiently faithful to access? Simply the unearned, unmanaged, unconditional gift of a presence that loves you, without requiring you to present yourself in a particular state before that love becomes available. To let grace be what it actually is would be to stop bracing, to let the shoulders fall from where they have been carried, up near the ears in the habitual tension of constant readiness, to let the breath come all the way down, not the shallow breathing of someone who is always slightly alert, but the full breathing of someone who has, for this moment, accepted that they are not responsible for managing the universe. To let the question of whether you are enough stop being a live question and simply rest in the answer that has always been given. You are. Not because you have proven it, because I have declared it, and what I declare is not provisional. There is a specific kind of release that happens when a person stops trying to control what is too large for human hands to manage. Not the defeat of giving up. That is a different movement, a collapse rather than a surrender. Surrender is not defeat. Surrender is the intelligent recognition that there is a strength beyond yours available to this situation, and that the most effective thing you can do is stop blocking its entry with the effort of your own trying. I know the trying has felt necessary. I know there has been a whisper in you, the protective, well-intentioned speaking of the ego, that has been insisting that if you relax your vigilance even slightly, something will fall that you are responsible for catching. That word has your history in it. It speaks from experience of times when things were not caught. It is trying, in its limited way, to keep you safe. But the safety it offers is the safety of a person who is always bracing. And a life of bracing is not the life I designed for you. The life I designed for you runs from the center outward, from the still place into the active world, not from the frantic world toward a still place that is always slightly too far to reach. What does it mean in practice to release what is too large for your hands? It does not mean refusing to act where action is yours to take. It does not mean withdrawing from responsibility or pretending that the challenges in your life do not require genuine engagement. It means something more inward than that. It means arriving at the decision that the outcome, finally, is not in your hands. That the deepest resolution of the concerns you carry lives in a territory that your striving cannot access, but your surrender can. And surrender, in this context, is not passive. It is an active choosing, an active turning of the inner life toward the direction of trust. A daily and sometimes hourly decision to let the anxiety of the unresolved be a less authoritative voice than the peace that comes from knowing you are not navigating this alone. The clarity you have been searching for is not at the end of more thinking. I want to say that plainly, because so much of the effort you have been putting into the questions of your life has been in the direction of more analysis, more careful consideration, more turning of the situation over to examine it from every angle, more consultation of the mental models that have helped you understand things in the past. And there is a place for that kind of careful attention. But there is a threshold beyond which more thinking does not produce more clarity. It produces more complexity, more branching pathways of possible outcomes, more variables to weigh, more elaborate constructions of risk and possibility that eventually become too intricate to navigate and collapse into the blank, exhausted confusion of someone who has overextended the analytical faculty without allowing the deeper knowing to speak. The deepest clarity does not arrive through thought. It arrives through alignment. When the inner life is aligned with the truth of who you are and who I am in relation to you, a kind of clear seeing becomes available that the most rigorous analysis cannot manufacture. It is not irrational clarity. It does not bypass careful thinking. It inhabits it. It gives it direction. But it has its source in something that runs underneath the rational faculty, in a knowing that is older and more direct than anything the mind constructs on its own. Indigenous cultures understood this. The ancient wisdom traditions understood this. The wisdom literature of the faith understood this when it spoke of a peace that surpasses understanding. Not a peace that ignores understanding, but a peace that reaches beyond what understanding alone can provide. What I am describing is precisely that. A clarity that is not at the end of more effort, but is available right now, in this moment, to any person willing to stop seeking it through force and start receiving it through openness. Consider what it might be like to stop asking the question with your whole body tensed toward the answer. You have been carrying questions about your life, about what to do, which way to move, whether a particular concern will resolve, and how and when, with the particular posture of someone urgently waiting for information they need to function. And I understand why. The concerns are real. The desire for resolution is entirely human and entirely appropriate. But the posture of urgent waiting is itself a kind of closing, a narrowing of the inner life that makes the still whisper harder to hear, not because the speaking becomes quieter, but because the urgency of your listening is producing its own uproar. There is a different way of holding the open questions, not with urgency, but with trust, not with the fist of desperate need, but with the open hand of a person who genuinely believes that the answer, when it comes, will come from a direction they can trust. That open-handed holding of the question is itself the posture that makes the answer most available. Not because it is a spiritual technique that earns the answer sooner, because it is the inward condition in which the still, guiding whisper is most clearly heard. Validation from the outside world has been functioning as a substitute for the internal orientation I am describing. You have been looking, perhaps more than you have realized, to the responses of others as evidence of whether you are on the right track, to the confirmation of people whose opinions carry weight, to the sense of external approval that signals safety and correctness. And there is nothing wrong with valuing the wisdom of others, with welcoming the perspective of those who know and love you. But when external validation becomes the primary compass by which you navigate, it introduces a dependency that is genuinely destabilizing, because the people whose approval you are reading are themselves moving, themselves uncertain, themselves not always in possession of the particular knowledge that your specific situation requires. The compass I am offering you is internal. It is built into who you are. It does not need to be constructed from what others think of you. It has been present since before any outside word had a chance to weigh in. Moving from external orientation to internal orientation is not a movement toward isolation or self-sufficiency. It is a movement toward the right source. When you are anchored in the inward knowing I am describing, when the still whisper that speaks your truest name is louder in you than the accumulated verdicts of every outside word, you can receive other people's wisdom without depending on it for your stability. You can hear correction without being devastated by it. You can accept affirmation without it becoming the primary thing your sense of self rests on. You can navigate disagreement without it triggering the existential alarm that goes off in a person whose sense of correctness is entirely borrowed from the outside. The right next step for your life is not hidden in a place that requires elaborate seeking. It has been accessible in the stillness that lives at your center, in the quiet clarity that comes when the clamor settles enough to let the sacred inner knowing speak. It will reveal itself to a person who has stopped performing the search and started inhabiting the silence. It will name itself in the language of rightness that your deepest self recognizes. And when it comes, you will know it. Not because it passes a test of external approval, but because it carries the unmistakable signature of the presence that has been speaking to you all along. Let this be the orientation you carry through the days ahead. Not a frantic returning to a phrase as a magical comfort in difficult moments, but a steady, practiced recollection of what it points to. The truest things are not announced loudly. They do not compete for attention. They persist, quietly, in the stillness beneath all the competing claims on your awareness. And they are available to you in every moment that you choose the interior depth over the exterior surface. There is something I want to say now about what carrying internal peace back into a noisy world actually requires of a person, because this is where the abstract becomes practical and the invitation becomes concrete. You will return from this moment of quiet to the ordinary texture of your life. The demands will still be there. The inbox will not have emptied itself. The conversations that require energy will still require energy. The situations that have been generating concern will still be present, and the question is not whether those things will call for your attention. They will. But from what inward register you engage with them when they do. The difference between a person who has genuinely touched the still center I am describing and a person who is still operating entirely from the reactive surface is not immediately visible in behavior. They may say similar things. They may take similar actions. What differs is the inner place from which the words and the actions originate. One person enters the demanding conversation from a place of agitation, from the sense that the outcome of the conversation is in some way a verdict on their worth or their competence or their standing with the other person. Their words carry underneath them the slightly frantic quality of someone for whom the stakes feel larger than the situation technically requires. The other person enters the same conversation from the settled center. Not because the conversation is unimportant to them, or because they are indifferent to how it goes. Because they are not depending on its outcome to tell them who they are. The words they speak carry a different quality. They can disagree without the disagreement feeling like a threat to their existence. They can remain in uncertainty without the uncertainty triggering an escalation of internal alarm. They can be fully present to the other person rather than partially occupied with managing the anxiety that the interaction produces. The practice of returning to stillness in the middle of an active day does not require large blocks of uninterrupted time. I am not asking you to restructure your life around periods of formal meditation that the shape of your days cannot accommodate. What I am inviting you into is something more woven into the ordinary fabric of what a day contains. The deliberate pause before a difficult conversation. Not a long pause, just a breath. A brief inward turning toward the still center, a momentary acknowledgement that the conversation about to happen is happening in the presence of something that does not change based on how the conversation goes. The habit of noticing, in the middle of a moment of agitation, that the agitation is on the surface and something else is underneath it, and choosing, even briefly, to drop below the agitation rather than amplifying it. The practice of beginning each period of the day with a moment, not a lengthy ritual, just a moment of orientation toward the truth that is older and quieter than the clamor the day is about to bring. These are small movements, but small movements, practiced consistently over the long arc of a life, produce large change in the inner territory. There is a particular habit I want to name because it is one of the most effective and most underrated practices available to a person who is trying to live from the still center outward. The habit of asking, in the middle of an anxious moment, not what do I need to do, but what is actually true. The anxious mind generates scenarios. It extrapolates from current evidence toward worst-case conclusions with impressive efficiency, because that has been its training. The alternative is not to stop the generation of scenarios by force of will. That rarely works and usually produces more agitation than it resolves. The alternative is to introduce a different question into the space where the scenarios are being generated. Not a rhetorical challenge to the scenarios, a genuine question asked with real openness. What is actually true right now, in this exact moment, setting aside what might happen and what has already happened? What is actually true? And the still whisper, which has been speaking all along, will answer. Perhaps not in words, perhaps in the return of a quality of proportion, the sense that the space is not smaller than the concern has been suggesting, the awareness that breath is still available and that something underneath everything is still steadying the scene. That is the presence answering, not loudly, never loudly, but with a truth that is larger than anything the loud tones have been able to say. Daily life, as I intend it for you, is not primarily a performance. It is not primarily an achievement. It is primarily a practice. practice of returning again and again to the truth of what is underneath all the doing. The truth that you are known, that you are accompanied, that the one whose whisper is the quietest in the chamber is also the one who made the chamber, and who made the space specifically with your particular life in mind, and who has not stopped attending to every detail of it for a single moment since you arrived. That truth does not remove the difficulty from the days. It does not guarantee the resolution of every concern in the direction you prefer. What it does is change the inward quality of every difficult moment. A person who genuinely knows they are accompanied moves through difficulty differently from a person who genuinely believes they are alone. The circumstances may be identical. The inner experience of the circumstances, the space available in the chest, the capacity for creative response, the ability to remain present to what is good, even in the middle of what is hard. These things are different. They are different because the inner place from which the circumstance is being met is different. And that inner place, I am telling you, can change. Not by force, by repeated return to the quiet center where the whisper that carries the loudest truth has been speaking without ceasing. Something worth exploring is what this practice of returning actually looks like across the span of a real week. Not an ideal week in which everything is arranged for optimal spiritual access, but the kind of week that most people actually live. The week that contains the unexpected difficulty arriving on a Tuesday afternoon before you have had time to prepare for it. The week that contains the conversation that did not go the way you had hoped, and that you carry in your chest for days afterward with an unresolved quality. The week that contains one morning of genuine inward quiet, and 4 mornings of harried beginning, and one day that feels like an inner desert where none of the usual points of access seem to be working. In that real week, the practice of returning is not a smooth and steady thing. It is intermittent. It is sometimes more effort than reward in the immediate sense. There are days when the return produces nothing that feels like connection, and everything that feels like going through the motions. Days when the quiet you manage to find deep inside is populated by the same anxious thoughts that populate the rest of your hours, and the still whisper is not audible above them. Those days are not failures of the practice. They are part of it. The practice includes the dry days. It includes the days of returning to what feels like an empty chamber. Because returning to an apparently empty chamber is not the same as returning to an actually empty one. And the difference, although invisible in the moment of the return, becomes visible over time as the accumulated effect of consistent returning changes the inner landscape in ways that do not announce themselves through individual moments of felt experience. Consider what you are actually doing when you choose the interior depth over the exterior surface on a day when the depth does not reward you with a clear experience of presence. You are practicing trust. You are demonstrating to yourself and to the deeper part of you that is listening that your relationship with the sacred center of your life does not depend on what the relationship produces on a given day. You are moving in the direction of genuine faith, not the faith that is sustained by continuous positive experience, but the faith that persists in the absence of that experience, that keeps returning in the dry season with the same orientation it brought in the season of abundance. That faith is worth more in the long run than the faith that is always rewarded immediately. Not because difficulty is superior to ease, but because faithfulness built through difficulty there's a depth to it that ease-dependent faith never develops. And the divine whisper, which is present in the dry places as surely as in the abundant ones, notices every return you make in the difficult seasons. Not one of them goes unseen. Not one of them fails to contribute to the deepening of the channel through which the sacred speaking reaches you. Before I describe what carrying peace back into the world looks like, let me say something about the ripple that a single person living from the still center produces in the people around them. You do not have to announce that you have found something different. You do not have to explain your inward orientation or defend your decision to live with less urgency than the surrounding culture recommends. The difference is communicated by the quality of how you are present, not by anything you say about it. When someone who has genuinely been in contact with the sacred stillness enters a room, the space changes in ways that cannot be attributed to anything specific they have done or said. The quality of the attention they offer is different, more complete, more genuinely interested, less occupied with its own agenda. The quality of the listening is different. Not the listening of someone waiting for their turn to respond, but the listening of someone who is actually fully receiving what is being given. These differences are not invisible to the people in the place, even if those people have no language for what they are sensing. They simply feel, in the presence of a person who is genuinely at rest in the still center, that it is safe to be more honestly themselves. That permission is not a small gift. It is one of the most generous things a person can offer to the people in their ordinary life. The light picture I want you to carry from this moment is specific, not the dramatic, sudden light of a spotlight switched on in a dark place. The quieter light of a window on a cloudy day, the kind of light that is present and workable and generous without being spectacular. A person can read by that light. A person can see their hands and the faces of the people they love and the path immediately ahead of them. It is not the light of absolute clarity about everything all at once. It is the light of enough. Enough to take the next step with some degree of confidence. Enough to see where the footing is before placing the full weight. Enough to move from where you are in the direction of what you are being called toward, without requiring every subsequent step to be visible before the first one is taken. That is the quality of illumination available from the still whisper. It does not light the entire path from beginning to end. It lights the immediate, the next honest word to speak, the next grounded action to take, the next genuine rest to allow yourself. And the immediate, taken with faithfulness and trust, eventually unfolds into a life that has been genuinely and purposefully lived. There is a particular beauty in the way this light works, because it does not require favorable conditions to be present. The dramatic light of spiritual spectacle is unreliable. It arrives in exceptional moments and is absent in the ordinary ones. The quiet light of the sacred inner knowing is not like that. It is available in the ordinary. In the morning, when nothing extraordinary is happening, and the day stretches out with its familiar texture of demands and decisions and small difficulties. In the afternoon, when the energy is thinned and the clarity that was available a few hours ago is less accessible. In the evening, when the day has left its mark, and the inner life is more tired than the face space reveals. In all of those ordinary registers, the light is present. Not brighter in the exceptional moments than in the ordinary ones. Present everywhere, without preference for the extraordinary. Because the sacred does not require drama to be real. It is most itself in the quiet, the gentle, the persistent, the kind of presence that does not need to announce itself because it is so genuinely, thoroughly, uninterruptedly there. You have been looking for this, not always with that language, not always with the awareness that what you were searching for had a name, but the search has been real, and it has been underneath everything else you have been pursuing in the days and months that have led to this moment. The search for something that does not shift, something that can be genuinely trusted, something that sees you fully and does not require you to present yourself differently in order to be met with care. That search is answered here. It has always been answered here, in the inner depth where the still whisper lives and speaks and persists. The search is over. Not because the questions are all resolved, because the answerer is found. And the answerer has been here the entire time, quieter than the din, steadier than the anxiety, more present than any distraction has ever managed to be, speaking the truest things directly to the deepest part of you. Not from outside, pressing in, from within, already resident in the inner chamber that was built before you knew to look for it, already filling it with the light that the clamor never managed to extinguish. I want to give you something practical to carry as you move back into the texture of ordinary life. Not a formula, not a set of steps to be executed correctly. Simply an image to return to in the moments when the clamor rises back up and the still center feels harder to locate. Picture a chamber within you. Not a spiritual abstraction, but something you can actually locate in your imagination. A specific inward space. It is always quiet in there. Whatever is happening on the outside of that place, however loud, however pressing, however demanding, the quality inside does not change. It has its own light. Not the sharp light of urgency, but the gentle, steady light of a lamp that does not go out. In that chamber, nothing is required of you. Not a particular emotional state, not a spiritual achievement, not a performance of any kind. You are simply there, and being there is enough. The whisper that has always been speaking finds you there, not with urgency, not with demands, with the particular warmth of a recognition that has always been waiting. The recognition of the one who made that place, who placed it in you before you had any awareness of its existence, who has been keeping the light on in it through every season of your life, regardless of whether you had visited it recently. That chamber is not a place you have to earn access to. It is not locked until you get something right. It is not available only to people who have achieved a certain quality of spiritual life or demonstrated a sufficient consistency of practice. It is yours by the simple fact of who made you and how you were made. You belong there. You have always belonged there, in every season, without exception. And every moment of genuine quiet you find, however brief, however incomplete, however mixed with the ordinary din of being alive, is a moment in that space, is a moment in the direct, loving presence of the one who has been speaking the truest things to you since before you were born. The quietest voice carries the loudest truth. Return to that chamber, again and again and again. Not as a performance, not as a discipline to be maintained with perfect consistency, as a returning home to the place you were always meant to inhabit, the home that was there before you knew to look for it, the home that will be there in every difficult stretch ahead, the home that I have been keeping open for you with a patience that the word patience does not quite contain, because it exceeds what patience alone describes. It is love, holding the lamp steady in the window, calling you back from whatever distance the clamor of the world has taken you, always with the same warmth, always with the same recognition, always with the same assurance that you are expected, that your arrival is welcomed, that nothing about the journey has disqualified you from the rest that waits here. There is something I need to say before we are done, and I want to say it directly, so that it finds the part of you where believing actually lives, rather than the part where information is collected and stored. The grace that has been described in this word is not an aspiration. It is not a description of a spiritual level that you are working toward and may someday achieve. It is a description of a reality that is already yours, already present, already active in your life right now, in the season you are actually in, not a future season in which you will have become more spiritually mature, or less distracted, or more consistently practiced in returning to the still center. Now, in this life, with its particular mixture of clarity and confusion, of faithfulness and distraction, of days when the inner light is easy to access, and days when everything conspires to make it difficult. The grace does not hold itself at arm's length until you demonstrate sufficient readiness. It is here, closer than the breath you are taking, more familiar with the core of your life than any other presence has ever managed to be. And the presence that carries this grace, the still, small, gentle, persistent, non-judgmental, warmly attending whisper of the divine, that presence will not stop speaking. Not on the days when you return to it with gratitude, not on the days when you spend so much time in the clamor of the outer world that the inner chamber goes unvisited. Not on the days when you are more aware of your distance from the still center than of your proximity to it. The speaking continues, patient, faithful, present in the way that only what is eternal can be present, without the exhaustion of sustained effort, without the wearing down that comes to everything human that tries to sustain itself over time. This is not a whisper that will tire of speaking to you. This is not a presence that will withdraw when the novelty of your attention wanes. This is the love that made you, tending to what it made, with the consistency of the one who placed the stars in their positions and has not let a single one fall unattended since. So go into your ordinary days carrying this, not the performance of having had a spiritual experience that you now need to maintain, not the pressure of sustaining a spiritual high that the ordinary days will inevitably bring back down to earth. Simply the knowledge, lodged wherever it can lodge, in the bodily felt reality of you, that you are spoken to, that the speaking has never stopped, that the quietest voice in every place you enter is always the truest one, that the sacred inner knowing is more accessible than the clamor has made it seem, and that every honest moment of turning toward it is received completely by the one who has been waiting there in the gentle light of that inner chamber, with the warmth of a recognition that has no beginning and will have no end. Amen. If these words reached a part of you that has been waiting for exactly this kind of quiet, stay here a moment before returning to everything that is waiting. You do not need to do anything with what you received. Simply let it settle, the way warmth settles into a chamber. Come Come back to this message on the days when the clamor rises again and the still center feels harder to locate. It will be here. The presence it is pointing toward will also be here. It has never left. If what you heard touched your spirit, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the truest things come in the quietest tones. Subscribe and stay close. There is always more to hear, always more to receive, always more of the still, faithful love of the one who has been speaking to your heart